Maria's wedding day should have been a sunrise carved out of hope. White chairs lined our backyard, roses blooming like a promise, music soft enough to float but strong enough to make you feel every word of the vows. She was 28, radiant, about to say, "I do," under an arch she planted with her own hands. Guests leaned in, phones ready to capture a fairy tale moment. I stood at the front row, not as a Chief Justice, not as the highest legal authority in our state, but as a brother who had raised his little sister since our parents died. Then a gunshot ripped through the air, and the fairy tale cracked. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. It was just the smell of gunpowder, the scream of doves bursting from the trees, and my sister's white dress blooming red. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. Because what happened next is the reason I'm telling you this story, and why no one, not even an HOA president drunk on power, is above the law. Her name was HOA Karen Whitmore, 52 years old, self-appointed queen of our neighborhood. For years, she had stalked Maria's every move, fining her for roses too colorful, denying her backyard wedding while approving 3 others for white families, filing complaint after complaint like a personal crusade. But today, she crossed a line she could never uncross. She showed up at our gate screaming about noise ordinances, then pulled a pistol from behind her clipboard. In that instant, she didn't know the man running toward her, the one calling 911 while pressing his hands to his sister's chest, was the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court. She didn't know every code she had twisted, every rule she had abused, was already documented in my files. She didn't know that the wedding she tried to destroy would become the trial that destroyed her entire empire. I remember Maria's eyes locking on mine as she fell, still full of love, still trying to calm Karen even with a gun aimed at her heart. I remember the gasps, the chairs toppling, the children crying, and I remember the cold steel inside me, the same steel that had carried me through years of law school and courtrooms, igniting as I realized my sister's blood was on the hands of a woman who thought HOA power meant she could terrorize anyone she pleased. This is not just the story of a murder at a wedding. This is the story of how an HOA tyrant learned that when you spill blood under color of authority, you awaken a legal power far greater than your petty rules. Stay with me, because you're about to see how I turned my grief into the gavel that crushed her world. Long before the shot echoed across that backyard, the groundwork for justice had been laid. My name is David Martinez, and for nearly 2 decades I've been the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court. On paper that means robes, opinions, precedent, and procedure. In reality, it means spending every waking hour defending the Constitution from people who think power gives them permission to trample others. I never imagined that one of those people would be my own sister's HOA president. Maria and I were orphans by the time she was 16. I was 25, fresh out of law school, still clutching student loan bills and bar exam outlines when I promised our dying mother I'd protect her. Every case I argued, every ruling I wrote, every sleepless night building my reputation as a constitutional bulldog was anchored by that promise. I didn't just climb the ladder of justice, I forged it, rung by rung, so Maria could have the life we lost. And she built that life beautifully. A pediatric nurse who volunteered at free clinics, she bought her first home with overtime shifts and sheer grit. She planted roses in the yard, mentored neighborhood kids, and treated every patient, neighbor, and stranger with the same quiet kindness. She followed every rule of the HOA, filed every form, submitted every plan. She played fair in a system designed to break her. That's what made Karen's crusade against her so vicious. This wasn't about aesthetics. It was about power, prejudice, and control. Inside the courthouse, I'd seen every version of tyranny disguised as policy enforcement. Outside, in our neighborhood, I watched the same tactics play out on my sister. fines without notice, letters dripping with passive-aggressive threats, whisper campaigns to turn neighbors against her. It was a microcosm of every civil rights case I'd ever presided over, only this time the plaintiff was my little sister. I kept notes. I kept copies. I knew the statutes governing homeowners associations better than most legislators. And yet I held back, hoping reason would prevail, hoping Karen would realize that community leadership meant service, not domination. Maria begged me not to escalate. "Let me handle it," she said. "I can win her over." That was who she was, a healer. But while she tried to heal, Karen was loading a gun. That's why when Karen pulled the trigger, she wasn't just killing a bride. She was igniting every principle I had sworn to defend. She had taken a petty HOA feud and turned it into a hate crime in broad daylight. And she had no idea the brother she had provoked had spent his entire life preparing for this fight. To understand what happened at that wedding, you have to understand the empire Karen Whitmore built behind the facade of a neighborhood association. On paper, she was a 52-year-old retiree with a taste for pastel sweaters and homeowner pride. In reality, she ran the HOA like a personal fiefdom, using the bylaws as weapons and gossip as artillery. She'd been elected president unopposed years earlier when most residents were too busy with work and kids to attend meetings. Since then, she had consolidated power the way petty tyrants always do, by rewriting rules in her own image and punishing anyone who questioned her. Karen stacked the board with friends who owed her favors, a realtor who benefited from her aesthetic standards, a landscaper whose contracts she steered toward certain properties, a self-styled accountant who quietly inflated administrative fees. Together they turned a simple neighborhood covenant into a labyrinth of arbitrary fines, selective enforcement, and intimidation. She'd lean on older residents with threats of liens if they didn't vote her way. She'd whisper about undesirable newcomers at coffee mornings. By the time Maria moved in, the HOA had become less a civic body than a private club, with Karen as gatekeeper. Her obsession with control went beyond dues and hedges. She kept a binder of violations on each household, photos taken without consent, copies of mailings, handwritten notes of who parked where and when. I saw that binder once during discovery later. It was chilling. Maria's section was the thickest, page after page of alleged infractions, most invented or exaggerated. Rose garden too bright. Car in driveway. Guests after 9 p.m. And scrawled in the margin of one page, underlined twice, wedding go no. Karen's hypocrisy was breathtaking. She had approved 3 other backyard weddings that same year, all white families, all louder and larger than Maria's planned event. She justified those with vague references to long-standing community ties and special circumstances. But when a young Latina nurse wanted the same courtesy, suddenly the rules became ironclad. It was classic discriminatory enforcement, the very thing I'd written opinions condemning from the bench. Neighbors saw it, but stayed silent. Some were intimidated, others complicit. A few even benefited from her selective favors. It was a textbook power structure. Fear at the bottom, patronage at the top, prejudice woven through every decision. From my vantage point as a judge, I recognized the pattern instantly. This was how small injustices metastasize into crises. But Maria still believed she could appeal to Karen's humanity. She filed her requests, adjusted her plans, paid every fine on time. She thought following the rules would protect her. She didn't realize Karen wasn't enforcing rules, she was enforcing dominance. And that's what made the day of the wedding inevitable. By the time Maria's wedding request was denied, I had already begun building a quiet case file the way I would for any constitutional challenge. Nights after court, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by statutes, HOA bylaws, and case law. I marked every section that limited board discretion, highlighted every clause about equal enforcement, and printed every state and federal provision governing homeowners associations. I wasn't looking for a loophole. I was building a wall of law between my sister and Karen's abuse. What I found was worse than I expected. Karen hadn't just been arbitrary. She had been illegal. State Statute 38.142 made selective enforcement of HOA covenants a civil rights violation. Federal housing guidelines extended non-discrimination rules to associations that controlled common areas. The HOA's own bylaws, amended by Karen herself, required written reasons for denying large gatherings and identical standards for similarly situated residents. She'd violated all of it. I drafted letters on official Supreme Court stationery, not as threats, but as documentation. Each one cited a statute, attached exhibits, and requested compliance. I wanted a paper trail so thick no one could claim ignorance later. Karen responded with the same smugness she showed Maria. Confidential board decision, not appealable. But she had no idea that every dismissive email she sent me was another nail in the coffin of her own defense. Meanwhile, I started pulling public records, property deeds, tax filings, contractor invoices, even HOA meeting minutes buried in county archives. I discovered sweetheart landscaping contracts that violated procurement rules, unexplained security fees billed to residents, and evidence of board members reimbursing themselves for administrative time. I wasn't just seeing prejudice now, I was seeing corruption, and corruption leaves fingerprints. I also prepped for the worst. Through judicial contacts, I confirmed that our local police department had fielded multiple complaints about Karen's harassment. Nothing serious enough to trigger charges yet, but enough to show a pattern. I quietly arranged with a federal liaison to flag any emergency calls from Maria's address on the day of the wedding. If something went wrong, help would be dispatched fast. But even as I built the case, Maria still believed. "David, please," she said the week before the ceremony. "This is my wedding, not a trial." She didn't know that Karen's hatred was no longer confined to fines and letters. She didn't see the practice sessions with the gun. She didn't read the racist messages Karen had sent her cronies. But I did. And while I hoped for a peaceful day, I was already bracing for a courtroom war. May 15th arrived under a sky so clear it looked painted. The roses Maria had nurtured for 2 years framed the aisle like living witnesses, and every chair was set precisely according to the approved plan. We'd done everything by the book: permits, parking, noise levels, so even Karen would have no grounds. Or so we thought. I stationed myself near the front row, scanning the perimeter the way I did in court when a volatile defendant took the stand. But I forced a smile for Maria. This was her day, not a legal battle. Guests poured in, neighbors, nurses, teachers, old friends. Laughter drifted through the yard as the string quartet tuned up. When Father Miguel welcomed everyone, I allowed myself a deep breath. Maria looked radiant in our grandmother's dress, James trembling as she took his hand. This was the moment we had fought for. This was the dream. But what they didn't know, what Karen had been planning, was about to detonate. I caught a glimpse of her at her second-floor window. Karen Whitmore, 52, shoulders squared like a general surveying a battlefield, eyes burning with the kind of contempt you can feel from across a lawn. She clutched something near her hip, but at that distance I couldn't see it clearly. My instincts screamed, but my sister's smile held me in place. For her, I wanted a perfect ceremony. The vows were spoken, tears rolling down faces, Father Miguel's words weaving a tapestry of love and promise. "If anyone objects," he said finally, "speak now or forever hold your peace." The silence that followed felt like a blessing. Then a voice cracked it in half. "I object." Every head snapped toward the back gate. Karen stood there, red-faced, a stack of papers in one hand, the other behind her back. "This wedding is illegal," she bellowed. "Noise violations, parking violations, disruption of the community." Father Miguel raised a hand. "Ma'am, this is private property with proper permits. I am the HOA president," she shrieked. "I make the rules here." I rose slowly, my voice low and judicial. "Ms. Whitmore, you approved this wedding. You have no authority to interrupt." A murmur spread through the guests. Maria's face went pale, but she kept her composure. James stepped in front of her protectively. "Karen, please," Maria called gently. "This is my wedding day. Just let us have peace." Karen's face twisted into something feral. "Peace? You people have destroyed the peace of this neighborhood with your loud music, your gaudy decorations, your kind taking over what we built." The racist undertone slammed into the crowd like a cold wind. Several guests gasped. Cameras came out. I began moving toward her, keeping my voice firm. "Put whatever you're holding down, Ms. Whitmore. Leave now." But she didn't leave. Her hand came from behind her back, holding cold steel. A gun. Gasps became screams. People dove for cover. Maria reached for me, eyes wide. In that instant, the years of bylaws and letters vanished. This was raw hatred with a trigger. The gunshot tore through the afternoon like a thunderclap. Maria crumpled in her wedding dress, crimson blooming where there should have been white. For a split second, the world went silent. Then chaos erupted. James fell to his knees, screaming her name. Guests scrambled behind chairs, some dialing 911, others trying to staunch the bleeding. And Karen stood frozen, the weapon still shaking in her hands, her face a mask of shock that looked almost like triumph. I dropped beside my sister, pressing my hands over the wound, shouting for someone to bring towels, my training as a judge irrelevant now. "Stay with me, Maria," I whispered. "Stay with me." Her fingers clutched mine, trembling. "David, I love you," she managed. "I love you too. You're going to be okay. Help is coming." But even as I said it, I knew we were losing her. Sirens wailed in the distance. Within minutes, police officers swarmed the backyard, weapons drawn. They shouted for Karen to drop the gun. She finally did, falling to her knees as cuffs clicked around her wrists. Paramedics lifted Maria onto a stretcher, but I could read their faces. At 4:23 p.m., she slipped away under the roses she had planted herself. As Chief Justice, though, I immediately recused myself from the case. But that didn't mean I was powerless. That night, while still covered in my sister's blood, I called the Attorney General. I requested a full investigation, federal hate crime enhancements, and oversight from the state's Civil Rights Division. I contacted the postal inspectors, the Department of Justice, every agency I'd spent my career working alongside. This wasn't just murder. This was a premeditated attack born from discrimination, and I would make sure no loophole, no technicality would let Karen escape accountability. Evidence poured in within days. Neighbors came forward with recordings of Karen's racist tirades. One elderly couple produced footage of her practicing with the gun in her backyard a week before the wedding. Another resident surrendered emails showing she'd tried to rally the board to force Maria out. The pattern was unmistakable: harassment, escalation, and finally lethal violence. The prosecutor built a case as tight as steel cable. And though I could not sit on the bench, I sat in the gallery every day, my presence a reminder that this time the HOA's queen wasn't bullying a nurse. She was facing the full weight of the law. When the verdict came back guilty on every count, the courtroom exhaled as one. Karen Whitmore, the self-styled queen of the HOA, stood pale and trembling, her empire of intimidation finally reduced to an orange jumpsuit and shackles. Judge Williams sentenced her to life without parole plus hate crime enhancements. The HOA she once ruled collapsed within months as residents filed civil suits. The state dissolved its charter, and a federal consent decree barred discriminatory enforcement for a decade. In the space where Maria's roses had been stained with blood, we planted a memorial garden and launched the Maria Martinez Foundation for Community Healing. Every seminar we run, every family we help fight housing discrimination, is another nail in the coffin of Karen's poisonous legacy. She thought she could erase my sister with a bullet. Instead, she erased her own power and built the stage for Maria's light to shine even brighter. Love outlived hate. Justice outlasted terror. And my sister's story became a beacon no HOA tyrant will ever forget.